Hey, Sean. So yesterday I mapped our release evidence jobs to be done. I actually mapped everything and stack ranked it across our entire release management product area. So just to kind of go through the structure so we know what we're looking at. We have the category in the first column. There's a UX issue that's usually around.
Sorry, I'll just be,
oh, go ahead.
One second. Can you just, I've got to get my glasses, sorry.
Go for it.
Yep.
I'll zoom in too. How are you, Hayana? Sorry, I feel awful for being late. I can't believe that I...
No, it's all right. I knew we were in a meeting before this call. But I thought at some point, it's like, maybe I'm in the wrong call. So I tried.
That was my fault.
I tried to leave a couple of times.
I hate when that happens.
That's all right. I love the spreadsheet. I thought that you were going to add a couple of user stories, but I love seeing so many of them here.
No, I tried to be as comprehensive as possible. Oh, we're all good. Okay. So the first column is the category. Second column is the UX issue if we had a scorecard that we ran against a user story or a type of action that we're expecting a user to conduct. We're going to end up inputting the grade from that user story. I've indicated if this has a user story that's required for a release management maturity path. So what I mean by that is the user base inside that category has to be able to successfully execute this job to be done in order to be ranked as a viable, complete, or lovable maturity. I've also added a priority, which is just a numerical value. And we'll notice that there's a couple of items that are crossed off here. The crossed off items are things that we've already delivered. Go ahead.
One being the highest priority?
Yes. And
okay.
This was, we can go through the release evidence.
Sorry to interrupt. Yep.
Oh, you're good. And then we have the actual job to be done in these columns. I've also added the personas that those jobs to be done are for, where this touches the GitLab application, and the current status of that user story. In columns O through R, we have the various issues that contribute to that user story. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and filter out all of the other ones except for release evidence. So when we look at release evidence, we've delivered 2 user stories already for it, which are centered around, I'm looking at changes to a production environment. I want to be able to see who made the changes, when and why the changes were made, so that I can adequately respond to an audit. This is for a release manager and a developer team lead. We had the collect release evidence at release end as what people could use to complete that job. The second user story that we've delivered is the things that you've recently just added and shipped, which is being able to easily and naturally provide a production source of change so that they can respond to an audit. So these on-demand release evidences, somebody can go in, generate a release evidence, and provide those 2 JSON files as a premium customer to an auditor as an indication of this is how a release has changed over time. Or as a starter customer or a core customer, they could sample 2 different releases of the same project, provide the evidence to show how a version has changed over time. So this is a really great opportunity for us to leverage both the collect release evidence at release end and the multiple release evidences and support on demand. The next priority for release evidence, which if we were to go on ahead and plug everything in here and sort by priority again, we would notice that our next top items are in release orchestration, secrets management, and then finally release evidence. So it would be my expectation that we would deliver these things first prior to delivering these items, just based off of where we need to move our direction. But going back to the release evidence kind of job to be done and what we need to accomplish to make it complete. When I was speaking with a couple of customers that were in financial services, in the insurance industry, in banking, which are pretty much the target market for release evidence. They cited that when a compliance team surfaces to a development team lead or to a release manager, that they want to confirm the records of changes made to production. They want to be able to minimize the disruption to the development team. So they would rather have like the compliance or auditing team self-serve the release changes without having access to the source code. So this will then enable them to adequately respond to an audit without disrupting the developers. The features that we are attributing to this are hardening the release evidence, which is this feature set that's about permissioning for the auditor so that they can go in and as an auditor and self-serve that evidence. And then the other one is improving the performance. So why I included this is we wanted to make sure that the IDs and the merge request IDs are in the JSON file so that we have that continuity of the change that we're requesting is the issue. And now this is the merge request that made that issue change. And I think this is more representative of changes in production than the issue ID anyways. And then the last issue I have linked here is any bugs that are associated with release evidence. I need to check that link. I know I have a bug out there. One of them being the guest visibility of release evidence. So we would want to address that as a part of this, making sure we don't disrupt a team or the right audiences have the right visibility. So the next kind of category move that we would be trying to make would be taking release evidence from viable to complete. And a big piece of that story is satisfying auditor rules. So for example, they being the auditor, may want to see that there's a separations of duty in the project. And what that means is they want to be able to see that who's ever made a change to production is different than the person who approved it. So the merge request submitter is different than the person who actually promoted that change to production. And the items that I've attributed here are like hardening the release evidence from the first category that would also satisfy a portion of this, and then highlighting the evidence differences. So this issue, Sean, you and I have kind of been iterating on it, which is pretty much showing the differences between two different MRs, pretty much changes that we see over time for any release. Because that's what an auditor is going to be doing. They're just going to be sampling. Go ahead.
Isn't there another issue around this also that, in fact, I think I commented on that around the comparison of the release hash? Sorry, this is it.
Yeah, this is the one.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay, my mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll end up like expanding on this and building out a UI component if that makes sense. And I think that this will be a really valuable feature to that. How can I tell what changes were made and who made them story? Then this last lovable item is the vision part of release evidence. So where I'd like to take release evidence is for it to be something that's a little bit more proactive. So for example, as a compliance manager or maybe a maintainer of a product, they want to be able to prepare for an audit. So they have like a self-run check, and they want to be able to confirm that certain compliance standards around MR approvals are being met. So what I have here is this issue that says use release evidence to triage rule violations. So here, what we'd want to see is release evidence having some sort of way to show that this MR doesn't follow a rule that they've set or a rule that we have set in GitLab. So let's say that we add a configuration item at the project that says the deployer has to be different than the submitter on the MR, and the release evidence would then show a comment or a flag some way that this MR has the same approver as submitter. and we need to go through and kind of review that and make sure that that change actually is acceptable. This is just about visibility. So we wouldn't be able to, like, you know how in the UI today, when you use Web ID, you can apply a suggestion. There wouldn't be any of that functionality. We wouldn't be able to, like, actually fix the problem from that view. This would just be, we can see that this is a problem. Another kind of thing that people might be interested in is if code coverage for that MR is of a certain threshold. So being able to indicate that this is not meeting the code coverage requirements, and then having that as, hey, this is existing in production today, you may want to go check out that MR and get that addressed. And then security scans are also something that we may want to include. And to me, release evidence should be this artifact that allows and empowers users to make sure that they are compliant, because that's really the story here. This again is like lovable. We obviously haven't sized it. It's pretty far down the priority list when we pull up all the rest of the other initiatives that we have. And of course it's not scheduled, but we need to deliver several things in secrets management and release orchestration before we deliver this feature set. But it could be very compelling for our financial services and compliance iterations. So we may end up elevating it in priority as I start to validate that with more customers. Is this helpful, Sean, to see this from a release evidence perspective? And do we feel like we can kind of think through like how we want to change the permission structure or edit the release evidence, or is there something else that I can do to provide that clarity?
Yeah, no, okay. So my thoughts on that are, so I remember when Sarbanes-Oxley came in, and in fact, you know, so I had worked a bit, you know, in compliance and not in audit, but, you know, in compliance basically, and in fact, my ex-wife was compliance officer at Citigroup.
Oh,
wow. And so I'm quite familiar with these, you know, what we're trying to achieve here, and in fact, what we're building is, you know, I can see it getting quite complex. Right, like it's, you know, there's a lot of amazing features here, and you know, even that last one that you pointed out, which I know is quite far down the track.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking then we could even have something that would be a bit like a RuboCop for compliance. Yes, you know, where exactly. You know, we could be completely, you know, we'd be so far out from the competition with that. And so the two thoughts that I had, so it all looks great, and really, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and produce this spreadsheet like this. It's good to see it all kind of, you know, as a dashboard. So the two thoughts I had were, like, maybe should we talk to whoever is compliance or auditing at GitLab to start with, as well as obviously customers. And I'm just wondering, you know, maybe there isn't, but maybe there is some open source product that does some part of what we're trying to do. I mean, it is pretty tied in with what we're, the structure of GitLab itself. So there might not be, but you know, if there is a standard out there, maybe we can either learn from it or try and integrate it even, or if it's a commercial product, learn from it. They're the only two thoughts, but I think otherwise, you know, I think everything's great. And I think we're, you know, when I first heard about evidence, I thought it was going to be little, but in fact, it's going to be a major feature, I think.
Yeah, I do think that when it was first built, it didn't really have what we're going to build for it. Right. The vision wasn't really there for it, but we're going to make it something that is competitive. Yeah. Like this will be a differentiator for us. And the fact that we could potentially have release be used by people that aren't using CD, I think is part of this angle too. So like if people are using just source code management and merge request and CI, they could just use this feature and create releases, and this will be a big part of their compliance story. And it'll be very complementary to our compliance team's efforts that they're doing too. So this last issue, the compliance team is looking at building out policies inside of GitLab. So if we can then have the release evidence look at the policies that the person has configured and then flag that they're violating their own policies, we remove 3 or 4 tools in their tool chain for the customers. So I agree that, yes, we should definitely talk to our internal compliance team about these user stories and look at, are there smaller maybe MVCs or iterations that we're not really considering here? And even edge cases that maybe would make release evidence less useful. So for example, maybe the way that we're thinking about comparing the diffs of the JSON files is actually less useful than having more of a dashboard about release evidence, which I haven't really considered until right now, you know?
Yeah, no, you're right. Because in fact, you know, the simple comparison that we've been talking about, okay, that won't be so bad. But once we start to, you know, think about complex comparisons, it'll be a lot to build. Of course we can build it, but at the same time, you know, an auditor might just want to take it out of the system anyway and just compare it externally, and, you know, and we could be focusing on other things that might drive revenue more. I mean, I guess the question is, you know, what do auditors need? And just going back to the example of, I remember the days when my ex-wife was doing this, and she used to tell this great story where they came into, you know, all the IT, because she was a woman, used to give her a hard time, right? Yeah. All the IT guys came in, and she asked for the log files, and they gave them all in binders, right? Like, it was like this, right? And she's going, what's this, you know? And they said, well, this is how we're going to give them to you, you know? Anyway, and so she picks up the binder, she opens the last page, and just out of intuition, and the log had errored. Oh. Right. It had actually, and they printed the whole thing out, and no one had looked at the printout, right? Oh. And here's this error, and said, you know, incomplete or something, right? And I think that's the sort of thing, you know, where you know, if we talk to people who are in the field, they'll tell stories like that and be like, that's, you know, straight away we need to flag those things, right? Like, why is this test always erroring, or why are these warnings always being ignored in a particular trace file? Because we only look at errors, actually. Like, warnings we just basically ignore,
right?
You know, things like that. And maybe some warnings are ignorable, but maybe for a particular company, those are things that are important, and they, I guess I'm really adding scope now. You know, they might have some way of observing, you know, particular incidents or whatever. But
and it's interesting that we say this, because I could see a really interesting use case where we look at monitoring customers and we tie like monitoring events to release evidence, kind of like a defect leakage metric, and we show like, what's the last release that caused a monitoring event, and displaying like the history of those as a log.
Yeah, because all these things, there's so much, and they're not connected back, right? Like a production outage is not. We don't have that retrospective of you know, it came out of this release, and in fact we've had similar problems in the last 2 releases. You know, it's just like, well, here's a critical issue, fix it, you know, do a patch.
But given that story of defect leakage, I think is something that I could really see release evidence accomplishing. And that would be immensely valuable for people who are using third-party tools to currently monitor that, right? Even if it's just a check, you know, if they are using issues in GitLab, then that is a whole all-in-one. But most of our companies that are consuming and interested in release evidence are using 6 or 7 tools to accomplish what we're hoping to build in this one feature. So there's this thought here that we have to also expose like endpoints so people could just grab the information and put it in their other tool. Like right now, a banking
importers, exporters, even, you know, like into a particular file format or something. Yeah,
exactly. Because that's going to be what drives like the usability of this feature, is how can we support these different personas that end up being on a receiving end of a request, because of the job to be done ends up being more global. Like, I need to complete an audit. And then these are the individual breakouts as felt by these different people. But you're absolutely right that I started considering third-party tools for this, and then I realized that we could use something like open policy, like OPA for it, but then we're tying our users to have to use OPA to declare their policies. And they may already have like another tool that they're using for that. And the more that we integrate with another tool that isn't like we build it into GitLab so it's unknown to that too. It's like it's just a feature that's unknown.
Yeah, sure.
That's different than like requiring and then a user to have to use that other area. But I do think there's opportunities where maybe there's different visualizations that we can pull in that overlay with release evidence. There's something to be said for that.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think that making GitLab the place that you do your work in is always, you know, and then, but still not closing the door, right? Having this avenue of APIs or import exports, as we've done with all, you know, we interact with Jira, GitLab, everything, right? And
Exactly.
yeah, whatever the compliance tools are, I have no idea what they are, but okay, yeah, great.
Okay, so I think some of my next steps that I'm going to pull from this is that since this was helpful, we should probably reach out to our compliance internal teams and see if this is like something that they would want to add to gitlab.org as something that they use. And then they can start dogfooding these features and help kind of illustrate what would be more important for us. Because I think we have a viable product now that it makes sense to try to start dogfooding it.
And you mentioned earlier banks because you know, they've always got compliance issues, right? And well, not issues, but you know, they're always got the high focus on compliance.
Exactly.
And you know, I'm wondering what tier we can bring some of these features in at, and the way to ask that might be to ask, what do you need? What would you pay for? You know, to.
I think
out of all companies, you know, lots of companies do compliance, but banks have just got compliance all over the place, right?
And they'll invest so much of their revenue to reduce the risk because they typically have like risk departments that then tell them that they have to do this.
They already understand it. Yeah.
Totally. So the value prop that we're offering here can easily be in premium because that's where most of the banks are sitting at anyways. But if there's things that we can do in Ultimate that encourage upsell, then we'd want to do that. I think the biggest problem with finance institutions jumping to Ultimate is that they don't see enough value for the individual out of Ultimate features. That a lot of Ultimate is for reporting, for security scanning, for like very large initiatives. So bridging that experience, showing that like, yeah, your individual gets the most value at premium. And if there was more compelling feature usage sets that reduce the time spent for the developer, then they would feel more compelled to invest in it. So I think this could be one of the areas where we show that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a big, I think one of the barriers to Ultimate is the big jump in premiums, right? Like,
right.
But, you know, but if it's something that's really actually going into the business, this is somehow leaving a bit I mean, obviously they're auditing the technology, but you know, it's from the perspective of the business, not from the perspective of the development team. And the business have the budget. You know, the development teams are working away in these basements somewhere, and you know, whereas the business teams or particularly the risk management teams, you know, they've got the budget to make sure it doesn't go sour on them. And we've got online banking, we've got mobile apps. There's a lot to think about actually in the finance area, I think. Exactly.
All right. Well, I have a customer call I got to jump to, but thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I'll post this on YouTube. Bye, y'all.
Ciao.